What's the hardest thing about writing? Well, it's getting started. Maybe you're having a hard time coming up with a story idea, or you're stuck on where to take your story next. If you want a way into a story or a way through, I have 9 story starters to help you. This free PDF is full of story seeds and prompts to get you going. To download your 9 story starters, go to nancypanuccio.com/start. That's Nancy with an I, Panuccio with 2 C's, nancypanuccio.com/start. The problem or unrest your character comes into the story with shapes the external story. It also adds a sense of urgency to the story. Inner turmoil isn't passive, it drives your plot forward. Writer Unleashed is for you, a writer who has a story you want to bring onto the page and into the hearts and minds of readers. I'm Nancy Panuccio, writer, editor, and writing coach. And each week, we'll explore techniques, mindsets, and inspiration for writing stories readers can't put down. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now let's begin. Well, hello there, and welcome to a brand new episode of Writer Unleashed. I have been on hiatus for the whole month of February. I was delivering my course, 3-Act Story, and my 18-year-old has been moving out of the nest, so I wanted to spend as much time with him as possible and help him with the move. So between family and professional pursuits, the course, and my students, who I'm so honored and grateful to be working with, I took a break. But I am back with a brand new episode. In today's episode, I'm going to give you 3 tips for writing your opening scenes and setting up what will happen as your story unfolds. You want to think of giving just enough to pique your reader's curiosity and urge to know more. Your opening scenes need to accomplish a lot through a little. They need to introduce your protagonist and other main characters, and you need to set the conflict in motion. Here are some common mistakes writers make. They start way too early in the story, often giving the mundane details of their character's life. This is often referred to as the status quo. But the status quo does not mean you give all the boring details of your character's life before you disrupt it with an inciting incident that compels them into the fray of the conflict. Sometimes writers spend way too much time establishing their character's status quo and not getting them into the action soon enough, and then the reader is left wondering where the story's going. So here are my 3 tips for writing your opening scenes. Number 1, start with the end in mind. You need to know how your character comes into the story and how he or she exits the story. How will your character end up? Will she end up happy or devastated, in victory or defeat? Now, your character can get what she wants and lose something equally valuable that she didn't see coming. Or she might not get what she wants and get something even more valuable in return that she didn't see coming. Anna Karenina gets her divorce so she can be with Vronsky, but she loses legal custody of her son and by the end throws herself under a train in despair. Humbert doesn't get to be with Lolita, but he finally admits to himself that what he did to her was irreparably damaging. It's not that he didn't know this throughout the novel. It was just knowledge that was subterfuged and suppressed. Throughout the novel, we've been disgusted with him and horrified at how he manipulated Lolita. So by the end, his own culpability vindicates him to a certain extent. But here's how to approach your opening scenes. Your beginning is the originating event of all that follows, and your end is the culmination. So whatever you include or introduce in your opening scenes need to bear fruit by the end. In my 3-act story course, we talk about how to bring all the story elements together by the end. So you want to get clear on how your main character comes into the story. He or she comes into the story wanting something, yearning for something more. And by the end, they either get it or they don't. That's the narrative question fueling the story forward and keeping readers invested. Now, you don't want to introduce your character with anything mundane or anything that doesn't bear any meaning going forward. So tip number 2, your opening needs to be attached to a problem. As readers, we latch onto problems. It's just the way we're wired. If I start reading a story where a character is not in some kind of trouble, unrest, or discontent, then I'm not interested. So what is your character struggling with internally when we meet him or her on page 1? For example, in the novel You Are Here, Marnie comes into the novel announcing she's lonely. She's very aware of her loneliness. She works from home as a book editor, and she's divorced, which only entrenches her further into isolation. On the other side of town, in scene 2, we meet Michael, who is also divorced, but his approach to solve that problem is to be more solitary. So Marnie, who we meet in scene 1, wants to get out into the world, and Michael, who we meet in scene 2, wants solitude. Now, this is a love story, but neither character comes into the story wanting to find the love of their life. They've both been bruised by divorce. When they meet in scene 7, it will not be an instant attraction. Far from it. It will take time and circumstances to bring these two together and to melt away their emotional defenses. But we want to meet your characters in some kind of distress. You don't want to make things easy. So we want some kind of trouble at the outset. That's what keeps us glued to your pages. We want to root for your characters. For example, in Little Children, Sarah comes into the story feeling like a bad mother when she's at the playground with other mothers and suddenly realizes that she forgot to pack her daughter's rice cakes. And at this point, all the kids are sitting down with their goldfish crackers, yogurt, etc. And one of the mothers says, "It's the second time this week," referring to the forgotten snack. And here's a little interiority to clue us in to Sarah's discontent. Here's an excerpt. Not that they would, but if any of the other mothers had asked how it was that Sarah, of all people, had ended up married, living in the suburbs, and caring full-time for a small child, she would have blamed it all on a moment of weakness. At least that was how she described it to herself, though the explanation always seemed a bit threadbare. After all, what was adult life but one moment of weakness piled on top of another? Most people just fell in line like obedient little children, doing exactly what society expected of them at any given moment, all the while pretending that they'd actually made some sort of choice. And then Marianne tells her, maybe you should make a checklist, referring to the forgotten snacks. Tape it to the door so it's the last thing you see before leaving the house. That's what I do. I am not long for this playground, Sarah thought. She looked up and forced herself to smile. Thank you, she said. That's a really helpful suggestion. So there's discontent. Things are off balance for Sarah. She's unfulfilled. That's her problem. She doesn't have a solution for it. She's unhappy, unfulfilled, and she feels inferior to the other moms while secretly criticizing them. And this will manifest soon in scene 3 when she makes a bold move to shock the other mothers as comeuppance for their subtle put-downs. So your character comes into the story with something incomplete or off balance. Sarah is at odds with the rest of the mothers she frequents the playground with. She secretly criticizes them, but she's well aware of their subtle put-downs of her parenting, which motivates her to make a bold move in scene 3, which sets the story's action in motion. But the reason this is a great introduction to this character, using the forgotten snack as the crisis point in this opening scene, is that this carelessness about her daughter extends throughout the story all the way until the end, when she comes face to face with the consequences of her bad choices, confronting her own emotional neglect of her daughter. So you can see why it helps to have your end in mind when you craft your opening. You'll likely come back to your opening scene once you write your ending. So don't feel like you need to get this all nailed down before you write your story. But you don't need to spend too many scenes establishing your character's status quo. 1 or 2 scenes is all you need. You want to get your character into the main action as soon as possible. And that leads me to tip number 3. You want to activate your character's inner struggle. The problem or unrest your character comes into the story with shapes the external story. It also adds a sense of urgency to the story. Inner turmoil isn't passive, it drives your plot forward. This is how you make the story more concrete, so the reader has something to latch onto. The narrative question driving them through the story is, will she get what she wants or not? So the problem is the way the characters experience the external world around them, their environment, and the people who surround them. But that problem will manifest in something more concrete as the story continues and early on. So your character's internal struggle should manifest in the real world. A character's conflict within themselves is engaging, but when that inner struggle spills into their actions and relationships, that's when your story truly comes alive. In Little Children, Sarah doesn't just feel like a bad mother, or she doesn't feel inferior to the other mothers. She acts out in response. For example, Sarah comes into the story feeling diminished. She's forgotten her daughter's snack once again, and the other mothers subtly put her down. And we know that motherhood isn't the life she envisioned for herself. But more to the point, this scene sets the stage for what happens in chapter 3. But before we get to that, let's go to chapter 2, a brief scene where we meet Todd, the stay-at-home dad, who is supposed to be studying for his bar exam at night when his wife comes home from work. That's not what he does, of course. He tends to watch the kids skateboarding. He's fascinated with skateboarding. Now, Sarah hasn't met Todd yet, but as we learn in scene 3, the other moms have seen him around the playground before and have dubbed him the prom king for his good looks. So when he shows up at the playground in scene 3, they challenge Sarah to get his phone number. They offer her $5 if she can get his phone number. But Sarah doesn't just take the dare, she raises the stakes. She walks over to Todd and she tells him about the bet that the other mothers have made and then suggests they go further. She says, "You know what would really shock them? If you gave me a hug." And so they hug. They have this moment. And then she says, "You know what would be really funny?" And they wind up having a kiss. And this moment isn't just about the dare. It reveals Sarah's deeper dissatisfaction and sets the stage for her choices later in the novel. And this is key. Your opening scenes should contain a moment of action that reveals your character's inner turmoil. Why is this scene important? Because it sets the story in action. It sets it in motion. As the novel progresses, Sarah and Todd have an affair and eventually plan to leave their spouses and run off together. Now, of course, that's not what happens. She doesn't get what she wants at the end to run off with Todd, but she does have a renewed bond with her young daughter. She realizes that she's been emotionally neglecting her, and she has this renewed sense of responsibility, which is why the opening scene is so key. It sets up her discontent and her relationship with her daughter. So everything comes full circle by the end. Okay, so let's wrap this up. You want to set up your story early by planting clues for what's to come as the story progresses, and to plant what could possibly go wrong as your character pursues her goal. So number 1, start with the end in mind. Your beginning is the originating event of all that follows, and your end is the culmination. So you want to get clear on how your character's journey ends. Number 2, your first scene should establish your protagonist's problem. There should be some unrest, instability, or discomfort. We want to meet characters where their life is already off balance. And number 3, activate the inner struggle. That problem should manifest in something concrete so that your protagonist has something to help solve their problem. So if a character comes into the story lonely, but not yearning for romantic love, well, that love interest will appear and test her and force her to deal with the problem she came into the story with. So you want to stay focused on your character's problem and the concrete desire that problem gives life to. That will keep your story focused and hook the reader into your story immediately. So there you have it. Thanks for hanging out with me today. And if you know any writers who need some support in their writing, please share this episode or the Writer Unleashed podcast in general. And if you love what you're listening to, subscribe on your favorite listening platform and please leave me a review. Reading how this podcast impacts your writing truly lights me up and helps me create topics for the show. Till next time, keep writing, and I'll talk to you soon.